Humans don't care about any danger. The briefing that should have warned me. The briefing file had 47 pages. I read all of them twice. By the time I finished the second read, my hands were trembling. Not because the data was confusing. The data was perfectly clear. That was the problem. I am Vexoran, senior xenobiologist and diplomatic liaison for the Cathali Council. I have spent 31 years studying alien civilizations. I have walked on 18 different worlds. I have eaten food that tasted like burnt metal and breathed air that made my eyes water for 3 days. I thought I had seen everything this galaxy had to offer. Then the council handed me the file on humans. The species lived on a planet called Earth. It sat in a system with one star, which was already reckless. Single star systems produced extreme radiation spikes on a regular cycle. The planet itself had 7 major tectonic plates grinding against each other constantly, producing earthquakes and volcanic eruptions with no predictable pattern. The oceans covered 70% of the surface and reached depths that would crush a Cathali body like dry paper. The atmosphere had enough electrical activity to end most species 3 times over. The polar regions were cold enough to freeze blood. The equatorial zones baked everything under direct radiation for half of every day. And the humans had lived there for 200,000 years. Not just survived, thrived. They had built cities, enormous ones, towers of glass and metal that reached into the clouds, roads that stretched across entire continents, bridges that hung over rushing water without touching the ground below. They had dug into the rock of their unstable planet and pulled out minerals and metals. They had sailed across those deadly oceans in wooden boats long before they understood what lived at the bottom. They had decided at some point in their early history that the sky was not a ceiling but a destination, and then they had left their planet entirely. I set the file down and looked at Elder Sarath, who was sitting across from me in the briefing room with a calm expression that I did not trust. They live on a Class 4 hazard world, I said. Yes, he said. Voluntarily. Yes. And their average life expectancy is only 78 years. That is shorter than mine by a factor of 4. Yes, Vexoran. They are aware of this. Completely. I picked the file back up. I turned to the section on human recreational activities. I immediately put the file back down. They swim, I said slowly, in the same ocean that has predators large enough to swallow a Cathali whole. Sarath folded his long fingers together. Yes. For fun. For fun, he confirmed with what I suspected was the tiniest hint of amusement. I spent the next hour reading the rest of the file without speaking. Section on human competitive activities was particularly troubling. They had developed an entire category of pursuits that involved moving at dangerous speeds, jumping from heights, competing in contact arenas, and descending into underground cave systems entirely for the pleasure of it. The section on human food included items that were actively harmful to several other species and at least mildly risky, even to humans themselves, and those were considered delicacies. The section on human exploration was the longest part of the document. They had reached the deepest point of their ocean. They had climbed the highest mountain on their planet, a Frozen oxygen poor peak that cost lives. Every year, and they kept going back. They had walked on their own moon. They had sent machines to every corner of their solar system and were currently preparing to send themselves to the next nearest planet, a cold, thin-aired, radiation-soaked world with no breathable air and no running water. They were not going because they had to. No resource shortage was pushing them. No threat was driving them. They were going because it was there. I requested a private meeting with Elder Sarath before my departure. He met me in the corridor outside the briefing room. I looked at him carefully. Is there something wrong with them? I asked. Medically, some kind of defect in their awareness of risk. He looked at me for a long moment. That was my first theory too, he said. When the initial contact reports came in, I spent 6 months trying to find a biological explanation. He paused. I could not find one. Then what is it? He shook his head slowly. I'm not going to answer that. You need to observe them yourself. I will tell you one thing. Only, he held up one finger, do not try to explain their behavior using our models. Our models were not built for them. He lowered his hand. And make absolutely certain they never feel threatened by your presence. Humans who feel safe are one of the most remarkable things in this galaxy. He paused again, and his voice dropped. Humans who feel cornered are something else entirely. I boarded my vessel 2 hours later. I told myself I was prepared. I had the data, I had the briefings, I had 31 years of experience. My sensors picked up the human solar system when we dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The data began streaming, and immediately I leaned forward in my chair. There were thousands of small vessels in orbit around Earth's moon, not military ships, not cargo freighters, small, light personal craft, recreational vehicles. Humans were flying around their own moon the way a Cathali might take a slow walk through a garden on a quiet afternoon. For fun, I sat back in my chair, clasped my hands in front of my face, and stared at the sensor screen for a very long time. Then I opened a new log file and wrote my first entry. Day 1, arrival in human solar system. Confirmed, initial observation, humans appear to use their moon as a leisure destination. I am beginning to suspect that Elder Sarath sent me here specifically because he wanted to see how I would react. I am reacting very calmly. Everything is fine. The mission begins tomorrow. I closed the log. I did not feel calm at all. First contact was a hike. I had prepared 3 formal greeting protocols for first contact with Dr. Maya Asli. I had practiced the correct human handshake, a brief firm grip, 2 shakes, release. I had rehearsed a polite opening statement in English. I had selected appropriate attire and read extensively about human eye contact customs. None of that mattered, because when I stepped off my shuttle at the designated landing site in the Pacific Northwest region of North America, Dr. Maya As was not standing in a reception hall. She was standing at the edge of a forest. She was wearing boots that were caked in dried mud. She had a bag on her back that looked heavy. She was holding 2 cups of hot liquid, and she handed one to me before I could say a single word of my prepared greeting. Coffee, she said. You probably cannot drink it, but you should at least smell it. That is the best part of being here. I carefully sniffed the cup. It smelled rich and slightly bitter and oddly comforting. I handed it back to her. I am Vex Oren, I said, senior xenobiologist and liaison representative. For Maya, she said, already turning toward the tree line. Research base is about 6 km that way. Beautiful walk, ready. I looked at the forest. It was dense and dark and enormous. The trees were easily 30 m tall. The undergrowth was thick. My scanner was picking up multiple large animal life signs within half a kilometer. Is there a vehicle? I asked. There is, she said, walking, but the trail is nicer. Come on. I followed her because I had no reasonable alternative. The moment we entered the tree line, the light changed. Everything went green and deep, shadowed, and the sounds of the clearing dropped away, replaced by a layered, natural quiet. Wind through leaves, birds in the canopy, water somewhere below us in the distance, the creak of enormous trees shifting. The breeze. It was, I had to admit, extraordinary. Then Maya stopped walking and held up one hand, and I stopped immediately, every sense alert. Bear, she said quietly, pointing to the left, 40 m away, at the edge of a small stream. A large brown animal was standing in the water. It was pulling fish out with its claws and eating them on the spot. It glanced at us once, decided we were not worth its time, and went back to its meal. I did not move. Every instinct I had was directing me back toward the shuttle. That animal, I said carefully, weighs approximately 250 kg. About that, Maya said, sounding pleased. Big one, healthy. It has claws. Yes. We are 40 m from it. 45 maybe, she said, already walking again at a completely casual pace in a direction that took us no further from the bear and possibly slightly closer. They usually leave you alone if you do not run. I processed the word usually. Usually, I repeated. Mostly usually, she said cheerfully. I followed her. I do not entirely know why I followed her. Some part of my brain had simply stopped functioning in the way it was designed to function. We crossed a stream on a line of stepping stones. The water was fast and cold, and the stones were slick. Maya crossed in about 8 seconds, not holding anything, humming quietly to herself. I crossed in 42 seconds, arms spread wide, absolutely certain I was about to fall into freezing current at every step. She waited on the other side without comment, which I appreciated enormously. Then we reached the bridge. It was a rope bridge suspended above a gorge. The gorge was deep. I measured it at 320 m to the rocky floor below. The bridge was made of wooden planks and woven cable, and it moved in the wind. I could see gaps between the planks. I could see the gorge floor very clearly. Through those gaps, Maya was already halfway across. The planks are solid, she called back. We replace them every 2 years. Perfectly safe. I stood at the edge of the bridge and looked at it. The wind shifted and the whole structure swayed gently. A bird flew up from the gorge below, passing through a gap in the planks near my feet, and disappeared into the sky above me. I stepped onto the bridge. I crossed it the way a person might walk through a room they believe could be full of hidden danger. Slowly, carefully, every muscle held tight, eyes straight ahead, breathing as steadily as possible. The planks held, the cables held, the bridge did not fall. I reached the other side and stepped onto solid ground and stood very still for a moment. Maya was watching me. She had a kind expression. First time on a suspension bridge, she asked. Yes, I said. They are wonderful once you get used to them, she said. I filed that statement under things I would never fully understand. We reached the edge of the forest about 40 minutes later, and the research base came into view, a cluster of low, practical buildings set against a hillside with an excellent view of the surrounding mountains. Before we reached the entrance, I noticed something that stopped me mid-step. There was a tree, a very tall tree, perhaps 20 m high, and halfway up it, sitting on a thick branch with her legs dangling in the open air, was a human child, approximately 6 or 7 years old, alone, 20 m in the air with no equipment of any kind. I looked at the child, I looked at the ground below the child, I looked around for an adult showing signs of alarm. 2 adults were sitting in chairs near the base of the tree. They had cups. They were talking to each other. One of them laughed at something. Nobody was looking at the child. That child, I said carefully, is quite high up. Maya glanced over. Oh, that is Owen's daughter. She loves that tree. Should someone be, I stopped. I was not sure how to complete the sentence. Is nobody concerned? Maya tilted her head slightly. Kids climb. She knows what she is doing. She is 6 years old. 6.5, Maya said, as if the additional 6 months changed something meaningful about the situation. I watched the child shift her weight, reach for a higher branch, and pull herself up another meter without hesitation or visible concern. She was singing quietly to herself. I quietly recorded a note in my log. Human children are introduced to physical risk at an extremely early age. The adults present appear to be fully aware of this and have made a deliberate choice to permit it. Request additional data on human child development. Inside the base, I met the lead researcher, a man named Owen Blake, who turned out to be the singing climber's father. He was warm and enthusiastic and gave me a handshake that was stronger than my briefing notes had suggested was standard. He showed me around the facility with obvious pride. The base was built directly on a mapped geological fault line. I saw this clearly on the wall map and stopped walking. Your facility, I said, pointing at the map, is on top of an active fault. Owen nodded without any hesitation. Best location in the region. We get better seismic readings here than anywhere else within 200 km. Built the foundation to flex with movement rather than resist it. He pointed to various structural details in the walls with genuine enthusiasm. The whole building is designed to ride it out when the earthquakes come. Have not had one above a magnitude 4 in 11 years, he said, and when we do, every instrument in the building goes wild. It is actually exciting. He said the word exciting with the expression of someone who had been given an unexpected gift. I smiled at him in what I hoped was a normal way and said nothing at all. That night I wrote my report to the council. I chose my words with care. Day 2. Human liaison. Dr. Maya Ooze conducted standard route to the research facility through local wilderness terrain. The route included close proximity to large predatory wildlife, a crossing of a rope suspension bridge at approximately 300 m above ground level, an arrival at a facility deliberately constructed on an active geological fault line. lead researcher Owen Blake has described this last detail as a practical advantage. I also observed a human child climbing, unsupported, to approximately 20 m in height. No human present appeared troubled by any of these circumstances. My working theory that the human risk response system may be non-functional has been complicated by direct observation. The humans are clearly aware of the risks, they are simply not responding to them the way any other species I have studied would. I require significantly more data. I am well. Bridge held. I did not fall. I looked at that last sentence for a long moment. Then I sent the report and went to sleep. They call it a hobby. I kept a personal log, not the official reports. Those were measured and professional. The personal log was different. By the end of my third week on Earth, it had 49 entries, and approximately a third of them contained some variation of the phrase, "I do not understand." Maya had arranged what she called a cultural tour. She described it as a way for me to understand human society beyond the limits of academic research. What it actually was, I now believe, was the most concentrated exposure to human behavior any non-human observer had ever voluntarily agreed to endure. It began at a racing circuit. The facility was enormous. It could hold nearly 100,000 people in the surrounding stands. On the track, machines, low, sleek, and extremely fast, were moving at speeds my instruments measured at over 300 km/h. The noise was staggering. The smell of fuel and heat and friction filled the air the moment I stepped outside the vehicle. The crowd was roaring, not out of fear, not out of concern, pure focused, joyful enthusiasm. I stood next to Maya near a section of the track barrier and watched one of the machines scream past at full speed, close enough that the displaced air pressed against my coat. The crowd around me surged with noise. A man beside me gripped his hat with both hands and shouted something I could not hear over the volume. He was grinning so wide that I could count his teeth. "They are doing this," I said to Maya, "for entertainment." "Best sport in the world," she said, watching the track with bright eyes. "If one of those machines makes a significant error at that speed, it is a risk the drivers accept," she said simply. "They know exactly what they are getting into. Some of them have been preparing for this since childhood. They love it." I watched the drivers for a long time. They were not in distress inside those machines. Their voices on the radio feeds, which the broadcast system was playing aloud throughout the stands, were steady, technical, focused. They spoke about grip levels and braking points and wind direction. They discussed those things while traveling at 300 km/h. One driver came on the channel and said, in a perfectly even voice, "Rear feels loose, adjusting." Then he held the inside of a corner with such precision that the entire crowd around me gasped and then roared. I wrote in my log that night, the human drivers at the racing circuit today were operating under conditions that would trigger emergency shutdown responses in any Castle pilot. They were not in emergency mode, they were optimizing. That is a distinction I am only beginning to understand. The fire station visit came 2 days later. Maya brought me to a large urban facility where a crew of 12 people maintained emergency response vehicles. Their function, she explained, was to respond when structures caught fire, to enter burning buildings and assist Whoever was unable to get out on their own. I had read about this in the briefing file, reading about it and standing inside the station, watching the crew run equipment checks were two very different experiences. The crew leader was a man named Finn Carter. He was not an intimidating figure. He was of medium height with a calm face and thoughtful eyes, and he shook my hand and gave me a tour of the vehicles with the same quiet pride Owen Blake had shown about his earthquake-monitored research base. I asked how many of his 12 crew members were compensated professionals. 6, he said. And the other 6? Volunteers, he said. I had known this was common in human culture. It still struck me to hear it said plainly. 6 people in this building had chosen to respond to fire emergencies with no payment of any kind. They had looked at the responsibilities involved, understood every one of them, and decided to show up anyway because someone needed to. Does the risk not concern them? I asked. Finn considered the question carefully, which I respected. Of course it does. He said, anyone who tells you they feel nothing going into a burning building is probably not the person you want going in with you. He leaned against one of the large vehicles. The concern keeps you sharp. It makes you pay attention. But it does not stop you because the thing you are moving toward matters more than the thing you are moving past. I recorded that sentence immediately and completely. He showed me the equipment: heavy protective suits, breathing systems, tools for forcing through walls and ceilings. Everything was designed to give a human body exactly enough protection to function in a place it was never meant to enter. Not absolute safety, not guaranteed survival. Calculated, specific, sufficient, with the rest left to human judgment. I noticed that phrase, just enough, began appearing in my notes with increasing frequency when I described human technology. Their tools were never designed to make them invincible. They were designed to make them capable. The difference, I was starting to realize, was enormous. The ocean research vessel came 3 days after the fire station. The ship was called the Meridian Blue, and it worked in the deep Pacific. Its mission was the study of hydrothermal vent ecosystems on the ocean floor, environments of extreme heat, crushing pressure, and absolute darkness. The ship carried 8 researchers and a submersible craft that descended to depths no sunlight could reach. I stood on the open deck in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, which was already well outside my personal comfort level, and watched the submersible, a small, dark vessel shaped like an elongated teardrop, descend into the water until it vanished completely. Inside that submersible were 2 researchers. They were descending to nearly 4 km below the surface. The pressure at that depth was 400 times the pressure at the surface. The water temperature near the vents could approach 400 degrees C. In localized areas, the suit systems and vehicle hull were engineered to handle it with, once again, just enough margin. One of the researchers was a woman named Clara Webb. She was 32 years old, held a doctorate in marine biology, and had made this specific descent 19 times before today. When she climbed into the submersible before the dive, she was laughing at something her research partner had said. She surfaced 4 hours later. I was waiting on deck when they opened the hatch. Clara Webb climbed out with damp hair and entirely lit up eyes and the expression of someone who had just witnessed something they would spend the rest of their life thinking about. How was it? Maya asked. There is a new vent field, Clara said. Immediately, already pulling data onto a screen, completely unmapped, enormous. The kind of structure that usually only appears in textbooks. She looked up. It was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in my entire life. She said it with such complete conviction and zero self-consciousness that I found myself entirely without words. That evening I sat with Maya on the deck of the Meridian Blue as the sun set. Over the water, I knew what was beneath the surface around us. I knew the pressure. I knew the darkness. I knew the things that existed in places no light ever touched. I knew all of it. And yet, watching Clara Webb's face when she described that unmapped vent field, something happened in my chest. Something unfamiliar and warm. Maya was looking at the horizon. I finally asked the question I had been holding for 3 weeks. Do humans not feel fear? She turned toward me. She did not answer. Immediately, she thought about it. Actually and genuinely. We feel it, she said at last. We feel it quite a lot, honestly. Some of us feel it almost constantly. She looked back at the horizon. We just tend to decide that what is on the other side of it is usually worth it. I sat with that for a long time. Later, I updated my official report. Week 3 complete. I have observed human behavior across multiple high-risk environments: competitive racing, emergency fire response, deep ocean, research at extreme depth. In each case, the humans present were fully and clearly aware of the risks involved. In each case they proceeded. I initially proposed a biological defect in the risk response system. That theory is no longer supported. Humans experience fear. They have confirmed this directly. They make a consistent, deliberate choice to continue past it when they believe the result is worth the cost. I do not yet have a category in our existing models for this. It does not match our definition of courage because our models treat courage as rare and situational. For humans, this appears to be a baseline condition of daily life. I am revising my approach to this assignment. I paused before sending it. Then I added one more line. I have been studying the wrong question. I have been asking why they do not stop. I should have been asking what they see on the other side when the danger was real. The call came at 3:14 in the morning. Ship time. I was in my bunk on the diplomatic shuttle, which was docked in low Earth orbit while I finalized a transit schedule back to the council for a routine update. The emergency channel chimed twice, then locked into a single continuous tone. I was out of the bunk and at the console before the second chime ended. The signal was coming from a vessel called the Ardent Sun, a human deep space mining ship registered to a private extraction company operating in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The signal was compressed and partially fragmented, but the core data came through with full clarity. Reactor breach, secondary coolant failure, hull integrity compromised in sections 4 through 7, 12 crew members aboard, position 2.3 astronomical units from Earth, well outside normal rescue response range. My shuttle was the closest registered vessel by a significant distance. I opened a channel to the Ardent Sun. Immediately, for 11 seconds there was only static and the low continuous hum of a ship under severe stress. Then a voice came through. This is Nora Dale, acting crew. Coordinator on the Ardent Sun. We have a reactor situation, and we need to know who just pinged us. The voice was steady. That was the first thing I registered. The ship was losing power in 4 sections. Its reactor was compromised. And the woman on the other end of the channel sounded like someone reading methodically through a checklist. This is Vexarin Cathali liaison vessel. In low Earth orbit, I said. I have your signal. What is your current status? Better now that someone is listening. She said, the reactor seal on Unit 2 cracked about 40 minutes ago. We have been managing it since. The main problem is the bypass route. We need someone to manually reroute the coupling on the reactor floor, but the floor is currently above safe exposure levels for most of my crew. How far above safe levels? A short pause, about 2.5 times. I processed that 2.5 times. The safe radiation exposure level meant a human entering that space would absorb a significant dose in a very short window. Cathali safety protocol in a scenario like this required full crew evacuation and remote containment. No personnel would enter that space under any circumstances. You should evacuate the vessel, I said. We are working on not having to do that. She said, our systems engineer believes he can complete the reroute in under 4 minutes if he moves efficiently. What is his name? Rook. He understands the exposure level. Rook is the one who calculated it, she said. I absorbed that. He had done the numbers himself and was still preparing to go in. Let me speak with him. A pause, then a different voice, deeper, with a rougher, unhurried quality to it. Vex, you are the Cathali liaison, right? The one doing the cultural tour. I am, I said. Good, I need you to do something for me while I handle this situation. What do you need? Keep talking to Nora. She has about 8 things to manage simultaneously, and she does not need to be watching me as well. Can you do that? I looked at my console for a moment. Rook, the radiation level in that section is something I can manage if I move quickly, he said. I have had this exact scenario running in my head since the day we installed this bypass 2 years ago. Thought through every step of it. Knew it might come up eventually. Pause. Knew it would be me when it did. Why you specifically? Because I am the one who knows where the couplings are, he said. You go where you are needed. That is just how it works. I had no answer for that sentence. Not one model in 31 years of practice had equipped me for it. I am going in now, Rook said. Keep the channel open. The channel stayed open. I heard him move. I heard the sounds of protective gear being secured. Methodically and without haste, I heard a pressurized door engage and seal. Then I heard his breathing slightly faster. Then resting rate controlled through respirator. I began coordinating with Nora across the other open channels as he had asked. She was managing 4 simultaneous problems with the same steady tone she had used from the first moment. Secondary power rerouting, hull integrity monitoring, crew positioning, and communication with any incoming ships. She handled all of it without her voice rising or rushing once. At 1 minute 40 seconds, Rook said, first coupling done. At 2 minutes 15 seconds, second coupling moving to the main junction. At 3 minutes even, main junction. The anchor bolt is stripped. Give me a moment, a pause. I counted seconds. There it is, the clean sound of a Mechanical component locking into its position, third coupling secured. At 3 minutes and 42 seconds, reroute. Complete, reactor floor should be. Reading stable pressure now. Nora checked her instruments. I watched. My own sensor feed. The ardent sun's reactor signature, which had been fluctuating badly for the past hour, slowed its movement, then stabilized, then held. It is holding, Nora said, her voice changed only slightly, only for a single breath before it returned to professional. Rook, get out of there. Already moving, he said. He was clear of the reactor floor section in 90 seconds, the door sealed. Behind him, the automated decontamination cycle engaged. I held my breath for those 90 seconds, without realizing I was doing it until I heard the seal confirm and let the air go. My shuttle arrived alongside the ardent sun 47 minutes later. By then, a second vessel had already appeared, a small emergency response craft from a mining platform 60,000 km away. They had picked up the distress signal during the incident and simply came. No formal request, no communication asking them to respond. They heard the signal. And they came. They arrived 12 minutes before I did. The crew of the Ardent Sun was gathered in the main corridor when I came aboard. 12 people, some looked tired, one had a bandaged hand from an earlier equipment incident during the emergency. They looked like people at the end of a long and demanding shift. They did not look like people who had come within a short window of losing their ship. One of them held out a sealed cup as I stepped inside. I looked at it. Coffee, the woman said, ship grade. So it is terrible, but it is hot. I took the cup and held it. Rook was in the medical bay. He was sitting on the edge of a bunk, allowing a medic to run a scanner over him with calm patience. He was a large man with an unhurried quality to everything he did, the kind of person who seemed to have decided long ago that rushing was rarely the best strategy. He had steady eyes and an easy manner, and when he saw me in the doorway, he raised one hand in a greeting. Vance, he said, you came. You asked me to keep your crew coordinator occupied. I said, I did that, then I came. He nodded, as if that was exactly what he had expected. The medic read out his results, elevated figures in several measurements, but within the range expected to resolve fully with proper rest and treatment. Rook listened to the numbers and said, okay, in the way a person says it when they were already quite confident the answer was going to land there. I pulled the chair beside the medical bunk and sat down. I had a dozen technical questions I was supposed to be asking. I did not ask any of them. Instead, I said, you knew the exposure level? Yes, he said. You went in anyway? Yes, because you were the one who understood the system. Yes, he met my eyes. Does that seem strange to you? I thought about how to answer honestly. It is not strange in the sense of being unexpected, I said slowly. After 8 weeks with your species, I'm beginning to understand that this kind of decision is not unusual among humans. What I still find difficult is that nothing in our existing models accounts for it. In Catholic culture, the individual is preserved when it is possible to do so. Protocols exist for exactly that purpose. What you did bypassed every protocol. Some protocols are written for normal situations, Rook said. This was not a normal situation. This was the situation. He said the words with the tone of something that had been settled a long time ago. Were you afraid? I asked. He thought about it with real consideration. Going in, yes, a little. He tilted his head slightly. Mostly I was focused. When you are focused, the fear goes quiet. It is still present. It is just no longer the one deciding things. I looked at him for a long moment. I did not have a response, not yet. Rest, I said finally. You should sleep. Already planning on it, he said, and laid back on the bunk with the ease of a man who had nothing to feel unsettled about. I left the medical bay and stood in the corridor of the ardent sun. The ship was stable. The crew was moving around me, eating, checking systems, speaking in quiet voices. The rescue team from the other vessel was sitting with them, sharing food. Someone had found a small speaker somewhere and music was playing softly at the far end of the corridor. An hour ago, this ship had been close to going dark. Now there was music playing. I opened my personal log and wrote one line. I think I finally understand them, and I think I will never see anything else the same way again. What I told the council chamber on station, Vera, held representatives of 40 species. I had stood at its central platform twice before in my career. Both times the room had felt large and formal and impersonal in the way that very important rooms always do. This time it felt different. This time I had something real to say. I stood at the platform with my prepared notes in front of me. The chamber was full. Word had spread about the incident on the ardent sun, about the 12 weeks of observation, about the tone of my ongoing reports. The atmosphere in the room before I began was the kind that gathers when everyone already believes they know how a vote will go. They expected me to recommend restricted contact with humanity, possibly an extended study period under controlled conditions. At minimum, a formal observation hold. The humans were clearly unusual, and unusual in galactic council terms generally meant slow and careful handling. The representative from the Vorathi collective, a tall, precise individual named Iris Grant, had already submitted a procession document recommending exactly that approach. She had cited human unpredictability, the high-risk nature of their civilization, and the potential complications of introducing a species with their behavioral profile into formal galactic relations. Her document was thorough, logical, and entirely supported by standard council methodology. I looked at it one more time, then I set my notes aside and spoke without them. I have been assigned to 41 species, I said. In 31 years of field work, I have studied civilizations older than our recorded history. I have documented species that had achieved a stability and peace so complete that they had not experienced a significant conflict in 3,000 years. I have cataloged beings of remarkable intelligence, compassion, and technological achievement. I paused. I have never written a report like the one I am about to deliver. The room was very quiet. The humans of Sol 3 are, by every standard metric this council uses, a young species. Their civilization is measured in thousands of years, not millions. Their technology is advanced for their developmental stage, but modest by galactic comparison. Their planet is one of the most hazardous habitable worlds in this region of the galaxy, seismically. active, climatically volatile, biologically competitive, their own sun periodically subjects their world to radiation events that required them to develop atmospheric protection that was, as far as our analysis can determine, entirely accidental. I looked around the room. By our models, this species should not be thriving. By our models, they should barely be holding on. I let that land. They are not barely holding on. They are building, they are exploring, they are reaching past their own solar system with instruments and signals, and soon with ships carrying human crews. They are doing this not because something is driving them from behind, but because something is drawing them forward. I looked down for a moment, finding the words carefully. That something is curiosity combined with a quality I have spent 12 weeks trying to name precisely, because the name matters. I looked back up. It is not recklessness. Recklessness is the absence of understanding. Humans understand the risks they take. They measure them, study them, prepare for them with enormous care and creativity. A human engineer named Rook, aboard a damaged mining vessel in the asteroid belt, had spent 2 years mentally rehearsing the exact emergency procedure he performed in a flooded reactor section at 2.5 times the safe exposure level before he ever needed it. He had thought through the cost long before the moment arrived. He made his decision in the quiet before any emergency existed. Iris Grant shifted in her seat. I noticed it and continued. It is not a defect in their awareness of danger. I initially theorized this. The evidence does not support it. Humans experience fear with complete clarity. Fire crew leader on Earth told me that a person who feels no concern entering a burning structure is exactly the wrong person to send in. He meant that the fear is a tool. It sharpens attention and directs focus. Humans have learned to use it as a navigational instrument rather than a stop signal. Someone in the upper section of the chamber spoke quietly to their neighbor. I did not stop. What I observed across 12 weeks and 49 personal log entries is a species that has developed a relationship with danger that no other species in our catalog has achieved. Other species manage danger. They contain it, root around it, minimize it. Humans have arrived at a different arrangement, one that does not appear in any policy, is not taught as a philosophy, and is not celebrated as a virtue in the formal way we might expect. It is simply woven into who they are. Danger for humans is the boundary between where they stand and where need to go, and they cross it consistently, deliberately, and almost always for someone else's benefit. I paused and let the room have a moment. The engineer Rook did not enter that reactor room for personal gain. He went because he was the one who could. Researcher named Clara Webb descends 4 km into the ocean because the living things in the dark at that depth are worth the effort of understanding. Fire volunteers spend their nights responding to emergencies because someone is inside who cannot get out alone. In each of these cases, the human in question was aware of the cost. In each case, they went anyway. Iris Grant stood. Her voice was measured. Liaison Vexorin, what you are describing may be admirable in individual cases. The Council's concern is systemic. A species with this behavioral profile at this stage of technological development introduced into galactic society, the complexity of That scenario is significant. I have read your procession document, I said respectfully and without hesitation. Its concerns are not baseless, it is a well-constructed analysis. I met her gaze directly. I believe it is answering the wrong question. She did not look away. The question your document addresses is, how do we manage the risk of introducing humanity to galactic society? I said. The question I would ask this council to consider is simpler and more fundamental. What happens to galactic society if we do not? The room was still. We have 41 member species, I continued. Together we have achieved remarkable things: stability, communication, shared knowledge, peaceful coexistence across vast distances, and profound biological differences. I nodded slowly. We have also, and I say this with full respect, for everything we have built, spent approximately the last 400 years doing very little that has surprised anyone. We have managed and maintained and preserved what we have. These are not small achievements, but they are not the same as reaching toward what we do not yet have. I took a slow breath. Humans reach. It is the most fundamental thing about them. They reach for the next summit, the next ocean floor, the next question, the next planet. They reach toward one another across burning corridors and across vacuum and across the broken floor of a ship that is losing power. They reach because something in them cannot accept that where they currently stand is the furthest they will ever go. I let my voice settle. I did not know, before this assignment, how much I had stopped expecting to find that quality anywhere. Elder Sarath was seated in the observers section, apart from the main floor. He was watching me with the same unreadable expression he had worn the day he warned me that humans who feel cornered are something else entirely. Standing here now, I understood fully what he had meant. A species that responds to danger the way humans do, not with panic, not with retreat, but with that forward moving. Nothing will stop us. Clarity of purpose was not a species anyone with clear thinking would want to stand against. As a partner, however, as an ally in the long work of understanding this galaxy, that quality was beyond anything our existing models had anticipated. I am submitting a formal recommendation, I said, not for restricted contact, not for an extended monitoring period, not for quarantine. I stood straight. I am recommending that humanity be formally invited to begin the application process for full membership in the Galactic Council, not as a protected species, not as a subject of ongoing study, as peers. The sound that moved through the chamber was not quite objection and not quite agreement. It was something closer to the collective intake of breath that happens when a group of people encounter an idea they had not allowed themselves to fully consider before. Iris Grant was on her feet with several others. The Durath representative had multiple arms raised in strong opposition. I waited for the noise to settle slightly, then raised my voice calmly over it. I am not suggesting this is without complexity. I am not suggesting it is the simpler path. I am suggesting it is the right one, for the same reason that right choices often feel difficult. They ask us to move past the comfortable boundary of what we already know. I looked around the room, which is, I have come to understand precisely what humans do every single day without being asked. The debate that followed lasted 6 hours. I answered every question raised, I addressed every concern in Iris Grant's document and several that were not in it. I showed the recordings from the Arden Sun, Nora Dale's steady voice, managing 4 crises simultaneously. The reactor reading stabilizing after. Rook completed the coupling, the quiet corridor with music playing an hour after the emergency had passed. I showed my field recordings from the forest, the suspension bridge, the fire station, the deck of the Meridian Blue. I showed Clara Webb's face, still damp from the ocean, describing an unmapped vent field as the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. At the end of 6 hours, the council voted. It was not unanimous. Several species abstained. Iris Grant voted against, as I had expected she would, and I respected her consistency, but the majority held with enough margin to stand. Humanity would receive a formal invitation to begin membership consideration. I walked out of the council chamber and stood in the corridor with my hands at my sides, breathing slowly. Elder Sarah found me there a few minutes later. He stood beside me without speaking for a while, which was something I had always appreciated about him. You knew, I said eventually, when you gave me this assignment, you already knew what I was going to find. I had a strong suspicion, he said. You suspected I would come back, recommending full membership. I suspected you would come back. Changed, he said. The membership recommendation was yours. I did not predict it specifically. He paused, though I hoped for it. I looked at him. Why did you choose me for this? Why not someone else from the council's team? He tilted his head slightly. Because you are careful, he said. You are precise and thorough, and you do not reach conclusions before the evidence supports them. If a careful person returns from 12 weeks with the humans and stands in that chamber and says what you said today, the room has to take it seriously. A different voice giving the same argument would not carry the same weight. He looked at me steadily. I needed them to believe it. That required the right person to see it first. I was quiet for a long moment. I was genuinely frightened on that bridge, I said finally. 320 m moving in the wind, gaps in the planks large enough to see straight down. I know, he said. I crossed it anyway. Sareth looked at me in that quiet way of his, and then he smiled, small, certain, and completely genuine. Yes, he said. You did. I returned to Earth 4 days later. Maya was waiting at the same trailhead where she had first met me almost 3 months ago. She was wearing the same boots. She had a bag on her back. She was holding 2 cups, and she held one out the moment I reached her. I took the coffee without hesitation. It tasted bitter and sharp and strange, and I liked it completely. She raised one eyebrow. How did the council session go? The council voted, I said. Humanity will receive a formal invitation to begin the membership process. She blinked, then a slow, wide smile spread across her face. You are serious? It took 6 hours of deliberation, I said. The Vorathi representative remains firmly opposed. A number of species will require significant engagement over the coming years. Process will be long and complicated, and it will not move in a straight line. Maya nodded, looking out at the mountains ahead of us. But it is started. It is started, I said. She looked at the trailhead. The morning was clear and cold, and the forest was deep green ahead of us. The mountains above were still carrying the white of last night's snowfall. Somewhere in the trees, a bird I had learned over the past months was singing, the sound that meant the day would be good. I believe, I said carefully, that you mentioned at some point there was a harder trail. She turned and looked at me with genuine surprise. You want to do the difficult one? I would like to try it, I said. That is not the same thing. I expect to struggle with several sections. The elevation change in the second half is, according to the trail records I reviewed, quite steep. And I understand there is a section involving a narrow ridge with significant exposure on both sides. There is, she said. I will likely be concerned at that section. Probably, she agreed. But I would like to see what is on the other side of it. Maya looked at me for a long, quiet moment, then she smiled, not the careful, reassuring smile I remembered from those early weeks when she was still being gentle with a very overwhelmed alien, but a real one, open and warm and with nothing held back. Yeah, she said, let us go. We walked into the forest together. The trees closed around us, green and enormous and full of layered sound. My boots found the trail. The air was cold and sharp and tasted like something I had no word for in my own language. Somewhere above us, a branch moved and I caught a glimpse of an animal watching us pass, large, unhurried eyes entirely unbothered by our presence. I did not stop walking. 3 hours later, I stood on the narrow ridge. The exposure on both sides was real. The wind was coming from the west and pressing steadily against me. The trail was perhaps half a meter wide at its narrowest point, and on my left the ground dropped away in a long, clean fall down to a valley that was beautiful and very far below. I looked at the drop. I felt what I felt. I took one step and then another. And then I kept going. Maya was ahead of me on the trail. She did not look back, which I had learned was not oversight. It was the particular kindness of someone who knows that being watched when you are working through something difficult only makes it harder. I crossed the ridge. On the other side, the trail opened onto a wide natural ledge with a clear view of the full mountain range to the north, peaks running in a long pale line against the sky that was entirely cloudless and so deeply blue it did not look like the sky I had grown up knowing. The snowfields on the distant summits caught the light and held it. Below, the valley was still in early shadow and looked like something that had been carefully placed there by someone who understood exactly what patience and beauty had to do with each other. I stood and looked at it for a very long time. Maya came to stand beside me. She did not say anything. She did not need to. After a while, she pulled the 2 remaining cups from her pack and handed me one without asking. I took it. We stood there together in the cold, in the light, in the silence of very high places, and I thought about 41 species and 31 years of careful, thorough, well-documented work, and I thought about how none of it had prepared me for any of this. That evening, I began my final log entry before departing for the station and the long work ahead. It took me a long time to write. I was trying to be precise. I came here to study a species. I leave, having been studied myself, though the humans were far too polite to say so. What I found on this planet does not fit any category in our existing models, and I no longer believe that is a problem. requiring a solution. Some things are not meant to be categorized. Some things are meant to be understood. The humans are afraid of many things. I watch them walk toward every single one of those things with open eyes and a decision already made before they took the first step. I have spent 31 years measuring courage in other species and finding it to be a rare and specific thing, a response to extreme circumstances, present in the moment and gone when the pressure lifts. What I found here is not a moment, it is a way of moving through life. It is the daily, ordinary, unremarkable decision to continue past the point where stopping would be perfectly reasonable, entirely acceptable, and much more comfortable. They do not consider this remarkable. That may be the most extraordinary part of all. I crossed a ridge today that I would not have considered possible 3 months ago. The exposure was real, the wind was real, the distance to the valley floor was measured and known and absolutely real. Maya walked ahead without looking back, which was the right kind of help. At the right moment, I looked at the drop to my left. I felt everything I felt, and then I put one foot in front of the other until I was on the other side. On the other side, there was a view of the mountains that I cannot describe in any language I know. I stood there longer than I planned to. I think this is what the humans have always understood. The danger is not the destination. The danger is the door. And on the other side of it, if you choose to keep walking, is everything that has ever been worth seeing.